Hello, and welcome to another edition of Coffee Talk with immigration attorney and estate planning attorney Brian D. Lerner. Um, we're going over a few of the estate planning tools and what can be done. And there's a particular kind of trust which actually goes by a few different names depending on who it is that you ask and what lawyer you go to and where you might research. Um, One might be referred to as the marital deduction trust. Another might be referred to as the Q-tip trust. Another might be referred to as the AB trust. But basically, it's all relatively the same thing. Um, Basically, at this particular point, let me explain the typical things that happen in order to determine which type of trust it is and how this comes into effect. So let me set the example so you understand, and then keep in mind that it should be done, obviously, while you're still coherent, while you're still able, and so forth. Now, the typical time that this comes into play is when there's two spouses and you have one, two, three, four, however many children you have. So there's spouses and children. Okay. And in this particular regard, even if, since you're in California, if you're married and same sex, that's fine. This will also apply to you. So, again, your this particular example is when you're married and have children. Okay. Now, let's say that you have worked a whole bunch of years to get property, and both you and your wife have accumulated lots of property, or even one residence, whatever it is, especially if it's only one personal residence. And both of you, while you may love each other dearly, the following essentially always comes up as a thought. If one of you dies, then the other one, will gladly, want you to stay in the house and, maintain it and have the same type of lifestyle. But ultimately, you want the children to get the house. Okay. And if you have more than one house, then one house goes to one child, another house goes to another child, whatever it is, and you two may totally agree on this. Okay, you probably will. At the time you're making the trust, and the initial trust will be called the revocable living trust. You both agree that Junior will get the house. Okay, but the fact of the matter is if one of you dies before the other, which is likely the case, then if you just leave the house to your spouse, just let's just say, when you die, you leave the house to your spouse outright. By doing that, what happens is you essentially put all the control of the house in your spouse, which means if your spouse wants to sell it, before the kids ever get it. If your spouse gets remarried and wants to devise half the house to the new partner, or if your spouse gets remarried and there are kids from that marriage, or there's new kids from a new marriage, your spouse may want to make sure that those new kids get it, that the spouse gets it. I mean, there's all different kinds of things that could happen. And when you and your original spouse are sitting at the table discussing with the lawyer what both of you want, the reality is, as much as you don't want to say it, you do not want that house going to anybody else other than your kids, which exist at the time that you're making the living revocable trust. So, what do you do? Okay, so now that's the problem. That's the issue. And it's not just real property, it could be personal property too, but whatever it is, most of the time this will come into effect with real property. So what happens is you start off with one trust, which is the revocable living trust, and then one of you will die. Okay, one of the spouses dies. Then what happens is the spouse uh, has made the request, and it depends. You have equal revocable trusts, one for the wife, one for the husband. Each, if the other one dies first, this is what happens. And what happens is you now take that um, revocable trust and you basically create another trust underneath it. Okay, so you have another trust underneath the revocable trust, and it gets funded by the property in the revocable trust, which means that, let's just keep it simple. You have one house. Let's just say that's all you have. So the house you have while you and your wife are living, or is in the revocable trust. You die, and now what you do is you now create what's called a Q-tip trust or an AB trust or a marital deduction trust, however you want to do it. And I will make videos more specifically on these terms later, but just so it's clear, the house then passes to a Q-tip trust. Okay, and what the Q trust says is the house now goes to the surviving spouse to be able to live in and to, if it's a rental property, to derive income and to get all the benefits throughout the entire rest of the life of your spouse of that property, but it doesn't go outright to the spouse. It does not become the sole property of the spouse. Okay. And what happens is after the spouse dies, which means you've already died, your spouse dies, the property then goes to the children. Okay. So that is a way of protecting the real property that both you and your wife have, that both you and your wife want to go to your children, but that both you and your wife know that there's a possibility, there's issues that'll come up after one of you dies, and you want to make sure that it still gets to the children. This is how you do it. So the Q-tip trust then becomes an irrevocable trust, okay, where the property is funded from the revocable trust into the Q-tip trust so that it cannot, the surviving spouse can say, oh, I don't think he meant this. Let me change this and that. No, it can't. That can't be. It becomes an irrevocable trust, which means it can't be changed, and that cannot be changed. And then once the surviving spouse dies, it then goes to the children and their, beneficiaries, and you have successfully done what you wanted to do at the time you've made the estate plan, uh, by events that occur maybe 30, maybe 40, maybe even 50 years after you die. It still goes to exactly where you want it. And same for your spouse. You both have the same issues. So this is a great way for you to make sure that the property goes where you want it to go, and that you have peace of mind that your children, intentionally or unintentionally, will not be left out in the cold. So give this some thought. It does take a decent amount of preparation to make such a trust, but it can be done, and it will protect your whole family. If you like the video, click like, subscribe, and go ahead and email and or call my office if you'd like to get a free consultation. More on the coming videos.